Empires are not built with hammers and swords alone. They are built with stone, with steel, and with the grand theater of law. But these are the tools for the daylight, for the crowds. They are the instruments of order, designed to be seen and admired and feared. A different set of tools is required for the darkness, for the palace corridors where loyalty is a currency and paranoia is the very air they breathe. Here, problems are not solved by a legion, they are erased. A rival with a stronger claim to the throne, a general who has grown too popular with his men, a wife who knows too many state secrets. These are not matters for the public record. They are matters for a quiet, permanent solution. A final answer for whispers that grow too loud. This is not the clumsy work of a brute with a blade in a dark alley. Number that is messy, unpredictable. This is the work of an artist, a master of toxicology, a specialist who treats death not as an act of violence, but as a delicate craft, akin to a chef perfecting a new recipe. She is a sculptor of final moments, one who can make a seizure look like a raging fever, a heart attack look like a fit of passion, or a sudden silent end look like a simple, tragic act of nature. In the age of the stuttering Emperor Claudius, Rome had its master artist of death. Her name was Locusta, a name spoken only in hushed tones, a name that could curdle wine with fear. Her knowledge of botany, of roots and berries and unseen fungi, was the most dangerous and reliable weapon in the entire empire. And her official title, though never spoken aloud in the Senate, was the emperor's personal poisoner. The knock on Locusta's door was not a request. It was a summons. Sharp, precise, and utterly devoid of patience. It was the sound of power that does not ask for entry, but announces its arrival. Locusta had seen all forms of human ugliness in her workshop. Jealousy, greed, revenge. They were common, earthy poisons. But this was something else entirely. The woman who swept into the room was not merely a client. She was a living embodiment of ambition, a force of nature wrapped in the finest imperial silk. Agrippina the Younger. Her name carried the weight of dynasties. She did not look at Locusta's collection of herbs and vials with scientific interest. She looked at them with the detached gaze of a general inspecting an arsenal. These were not plants. They were weapons, and she was here to choose one. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft hiss of a simmering pot. "They say your work is flawless," Agrippina began, her voice low and controlled, a weapon in its own right. "They say you deliver certainty where the gods only offer chance." Locusta offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I provide outcomes, Your Majesty. Specific, predictable outcomes." A faint, cold smile touched Agrippina's lips. "I have a liability," she said, the word dripping with disdain. "An old, sentimental liability who sits on the throne and dreams of mushrooms. The stability of Rome requires a change in leadership." She stepped closer, her shadow falling over Locusta's workbench. "I am not commissioning a sickness," she whispered, her intent now perfectly, chillingly clear. "I am commissioning a quiet, dignified, and very permanent conclusion." And what of the target? The master of the world? The divine Emperor Claudius himself? At that very moment, he was not contemplating conquest or law. He was engaged in a far more urgent personal battle, a war against heartburn. This was the man fate had chosen, a scholar who stuttered, a historian who limped. He was the imperial family's afterthought, famously pulled from behind a curtain by the Praetorian Guard, and in a moment of sheer, beautiful absurdity, declared emperor. It was a promotion he seemed to have never truly recovered from. His daily anxieties were not for the legions on the frontier, but for the mushrooms arriving from the forests of Bithynia. Were they plump? Were they properly cleaned? Would his chef, a man who held more influence over the emperor than any senator, dare to overcook them? These were the true affairs of state, the real matters of imperial importance. He issued edicts with a mouth full of food. He debated policy while rubbing his stomach. In his paranoid mind, assassins lurked in every hallway. Yet he failed to see the most dangerous one of all, the one who shared his bed and fluffed his pillows. To Agrippina, his pathetic obsession wasn't a weakness. It was an engraved invitation, a perfectly set stage. Claudius, ruler of millions, was a slave to his own appetite, and so his throne would not be taken by a sword. It would be taken by a single, perfectly seasoned mushroom, served with a side of absolute betrayal. Back in the quiet, herb-scented workshop, there was no gasp of shock, no moral hesitation. Locusta did not trade in morality. She traded in results. This was simply a negotiation, the most high-stakes negotiation of her career. A conclusion, Locusta repeated, her voice even and professional. These things require precision. Details are important. Does the departure need to be sudden, or should it present as a lingering illness? Each has its own price, its own artistry. Fast! Agrippina snapped, her patience wearing thin. But not so fast as to look like a blade's work. It must appear natural. A sudden turn of his already fragile health. The Senate must weep, not whisper. And the vessel? Locusta asked, her tone purely clinical. A plate of food? A cup of wine? The delivery system is as crucial as the product itself. Agrippina did not answer with words. Instead, a heavy leather pouch was placed on the table. The sound it made was not a jingle. It was a dull, authoritative thud. The sound of gold, heavy enough to buy an army or to end an emperor. This will be sufficient, Locusta said, her eyes briefly gleaming in the lamplight, for the finest ingredients. And with that, the contract was sealed. Not with ink and parchment, but with a silent nod between two masters of their respective crafts, a queen's ambition and a poisoner's price. The throne of Rome had just been put up for sale, and the first payment had been made in full. With the Empress's gold cooling on her table and the scent of raw ambition still hanging in the air, Locusta finally went to work. This was her sanctuary, her studio, her kitchen. To the outside world, it was a simple room filled with herbs. To the initiated, it was the most sophisticated laboratory in all of Rome. There were no bubbling cauldrons or arcane symbols here. Only order. Jars of dried leaves, meticulously labeled in a script only she could read. Vials of pale liquids, arranged by potency from mild to absolute. Mortars and pestles of polished stone, each one dedicated to a specific type of root or seed. This was a place of science, of knowledge passed down through whispers and secret texts. She moved with a quiet, practiced grace. Her hands, which had accepted a queen's blood money, now gently crushed a sprig of hemlock. She measured a pinch of nightshade with the precision of a jeweler weighing diamonds. Each ingredient had a purpose, a voice in her silent symphony of death. One offered a swift, sharp note. Another, a long, lingering crescendo of pain. The art was in the composition. She felt no malice towards Claudius. The emperor was not a man to her. He was a canvas a complex biological puzzle to be solved. Her task was to create a masterpiece of toxicology, so perfectly tailored to its target that its very existence would be denied by nature itself. The task was not simply to kill. Any fool with a strong stomach could do that. The true challenge, the art of it, was to craft a death that told a convincing lie. A death that would be mourned by the public, not investigated by the guards. Locusta considered her vast library of options, dismissing each one with cold logic. Arsenic? Too common. The clumsy tool of amateurs. It left telltale signs, a bitter metallic taste that even a glutton like Claudius might detect. The work would be exposed. Hemlock? Too famous. Too theatrical. The death of Socrates had made it a philosopher's poison, not an emperor's. It would invite inconvenient questions, and questions were the enemy of a clean contract. Nightshade? Potent, yes. But its effects were a violent, ugly storm of convulsions and madness. Agrippina wanted the Senate to weep, not to recoil in horror. The death needed a certain political grace. The solution had to be more subtle, more personal. The poison should not be an intruder in the meal. It had to be the meal. It had to hide in plain sight. And then, the perfect poetic irony presented itself. Claudius's greatest love would become his most loyal executioner, his obsession with a rare mushroom, the amanita, a delicacy. But the amanita family has a lesser-known cousin, one that looks nearly identical, one that is not a delicacy, but a death sentence. The choice was made. It was elegant, it was untraceable, and it was, in its own way, beautiful. The stage was set. The players were in position. The specially selected mushroom, brimming with Locusta's subtle art, was presented to the emperor on a golden platter. It was prepared exactly as he liked it. A dish fit for a god, designed to send him to meet them. Claudius, with the gusto of a true connoisseur, devoured it. He praised the chef. He praised the unique, earthy flavor. He even asked for a second helping, which was, regrettably, unavailable. Agrippina watched from her seat, her hands clenched, her breath held. She waited for the final, elegant collapse, the quiet end of an era, but the collapse never came. Instead, what came was a groan, a deep, guttural sound of profound gastric distress. The emperor's face turned not pale, but a shade of alarming green. The divine Claudius, master of the known world, did not die. He simply got a terrible case of indigestion. The imperial chambers, once a place of silent tension, now echoed with the sounds of a very mortal, very upset stomach. Servants ran for water. Courtiers offered useless advice. Agrippina could only stare in disbelief. Her meticulously planned regicide had been foiled by a strong constitution and an untimely bout of gas. The poison was a masterpiece of subtlety. Too subtle, it turned out. The artist's perfect note had been drowned out by an emperor's plumbing. The throne was still occupied, and the client was not pleased. The summons came before dawn. There was no polite knock this time. The door to Locusta's workshop was thrown open by a Praetorian guard, his face a mask of grim duty. Agrippina was waiting inside, a living statue carved from fury. The empress was not screaming. Screaming is a luxury for the powerless. Instead, she radiated a cold, silent rage that was far more terrifying. The air in the room grew heavy, thin. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. "An upset stomach," she hissed, the words dripping with contempt. "I paid a fortune for the end of an emperor, And you gave him a bellyache. Tell me, are you the greatest poisoner in Rome, or just a common street peddler of expired laxatives?" Locusta stood her ground, her own face a professional mask, betraying nothing. "The emperor's constitution is surprisingly robust," she offered, choosing her words with extreme care. "The dosage was miscalculated. It is a science, Your Majesty, not magic. Sometimes adjustments are needed." Agrippina took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Let me be clear," she whispered, her voice dangerously soft. "There will be no more miscalculations. There will be no more adjustments." She was now inches from Locusta's face. "You will produce a solution that works. The next time I see you, either he is dead or you are. You will have the distinct honor of testing your own failed product. Am I understood?" The threat hung in the air, more potent than any poison in the room. The contract had been updated. The new price for failure was death. Failure was not an option. Death was now the alternative. Back in her workshop, the quiet confidence of the artist was gone, replaced by the sharp-edged focus of a survivor. The Empress's threat echoed louder than any grinding pestle. The first plan was elegant, a masterpiece of misdirection. But subtlety had failed. Claudius's body was too strong, too unpredictable. A second attempt through his food would be met with immediate suspicion. The court tasters would be on high alert. The emperor himself, now wary of his own stomach, would surely refuse the dish. The poison could not be something he willingly consumed. It had to be something administered, a direct route bypassing his iron gut entirely. Locusta's eyes scanned the room, past the lethal herbs and deadly powders, landing on a simple box of medical supplies. Linens, ointments, and a collection of soft, fine ostrich feathers used for applying balms or for gently tickling a patient's throat to induce vomiting. And there it was, the new plan, as brilliant as it was macabre. The next time Claudius ate the tainted mushrooms, and he would eat them, the loyal court physician, Xenophon, would rush to his side. He would feign grave concern. He would recommend clearing the emperor's stomach immediately, and he would use a feather to do it. A single, innocent-looking feather. But its delicate tip would be painted with a second, far more potent poison. A fast-acting concentrate, absorbed instantly by the soft tissues of the throat. One poison to create the opportunity, a second to deliver the final blow. This was no longer art. It was brutal, efficient, and foolproof. The imperial dining room was a theater of power. Marble floors gleamed under the light of 1,000 oil lamps. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, exotic spices, and carefully constructed lies. At the head of the table sat Claudius, blissfully unaware, already several cups of wine deep. He was laughing, telling a long, boring story about Etruscan pottery that no one, especially not his wife, was listening to. Across from him, Agrippina sat poised and perfect, the very picture of a devoted wife. She smiled at his jokes. She refilled his cup. But her eyes, cold and sharp as obsidian chips, darted occasionally towards the shadows, where the physician, Xenophon, stood waiting. His medical bag was at his side. It contained oils, bandages, and a single elegant ostrich feather. Then, the moment arrived. A special dish, brought forth on a silver platter, reserved only for the emperor. The steam rose, carrying the rich, earthy aroma of wild mushrooms. Locusta's first gift. The bait. A servant placed the dish before Claudius. His eyes lit up with a familiar, greedy joy. He looked upon his own death warrant as a child looks upon a birthday cake. He picked up his golden fork. He took the first bite. Agrippina held her breath, a silent prayer to gods she did not believe in. The final act of the tragedy had officially begun. For a long moment, nothing happened. Claudius chewed thoughtfully. He took another sip of wine. He even managed to start another rambling story, this time about the drainage systems of Alexandria. Agrippina's heart hammered against her ribs. Had it failed again? Was this another farce? But then, he stopped. Mid-sentence, his fork clattered against the golden plate. A look of profound confusion washed over his face. He blinked, as if trying to clear a fog that had suddenly descended upon his mind. He brought a hand to his throat. A small cough escaped his lips. Then another. This one deeper, wetter. His breath grew ragged. The ruddy color drained from his cheeks, replaced by a sickly, grayish pallor. He tried to speak, to call for help, but only a strangled gurgle emerged. The forced laughter around the table died instantly. The music faltered into silence. Every eye was fixed on the emperor, who was now visibly struggling for air, his body trembling. The carefully constructed theater of the evening had crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly reality beneath. He slumped forward, his body shuddering, his wine cup tipping over and spilling a dark red stain across the white linen, like a prophecy of blood. This was not indigestion. This was it. The beginning of the end. And it was Xenophon's cue to step out of the shadows. The point of no return had been crossed. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward. Servants shrieked. But through the noise, one man moved with calm, calculated purpose. The physician, Xenophon. He knelt beside the gasping emperor, his face a perfect mask of professional concern. "A seizure," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "He has eaten too much. We must help him clear his stomach before he chokes." It was the perfect diagnosis. A lie wrapped in the language of medicine, delivered to a terrified and confused audience. No one would question the doctor. He opened his medical bag and produced the instrument of salvation, not a vial of medicine or a surgeon's knife, just a single, soft, white ostrich feather. It looked so innocent, so harmless, a tool of comfort. "Hold him still," Xenophon commanded the guards. He approached the emperor's open, gasping mouth. "This will bring relief, my emperor," he whispered, a monstrous lie delivered with a soothing tone. And then, he gently inserted the feather deep into Claudius's throat, supposedly to trigger the gag reflex. But this was no act of mercy. This was the second silent sting. The feather's tip, painted with Locusta's most potent, fast-acting poison, made contact with the soft tissues. The deadly compound was absorbed instantly, directly into the bloodstream. For a fleeting second, the emperor's eyes went wide. Not with pain, but with a sudden final clarity, a look of pure shock. Perhaps in that last moment, he finally understood the betrayal. Then, nothing. The gurgling stopped. An absolute silence fell over the room. The feather had delivered its kiss, and the throne of Rome was now vacant. The silence that followed the emperor's last breath lasted for a single, perfect heartbeat. Then, the theater began. Agrippina let out a piercing shriek of sorrow, a performance so convincing it could have won an award at the Colosseum. She threw herself over her husband's lifeless body, her sobs echoing through the grand hall. It was a signal. Immediately, the room filled with a chorus of orchestrated grief. Senators who had cursed Claudius that very morning now tore at their hair in theatrical despair. Courtiers who had mocked his stutter now praised his lost wisdom. It was a race to see who could appear the most devastated. A promotion could depend on the quality of one's tears. But behind this curtain of fake sorrow, the reality was far less noble. Death is not dignified. It is a messy biological event. Servants were quietly, frantically ordered to clean the mess the late emperor had made in his final moments. The guards, stone-faced, secured the doors, not to keep assassins out, but to keep the truth from escaping. Agrippina, between perfectly timed sobs, issued quiet, firm commands. "No one leaves," she'd whisper to a guard. "Announce that the emperor is merely resting." She was a director, managing the final scene. She had to keep the illusion of life going, just long enough for Nero to secure the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. The most powerful man in the world lay dead on his own dining room floor, his death treated as an inconvenient, embarrassing logistical problem. The great Emperor Claudius was now just stagecraft. While the ghost of Claudius still lingered in the dining hall, a very different scene was unfolding in the barracks of the Praetorian Guard. Here, there were no tears, only the clink of gold coins and the sharp, decisive language of a political transaction. Nero, pushed forward by his mother's proxies, stood before the commanders. He was no warrior, no great orator. He was just a boy with a famous name and a very, very heavy purse. A donation was promised to every soldier, a generous gift to secure their loyalty and their silence. It was the oldest trick in the Roman political playbook, and it worked. Every time. Only when the guard was secured did the palace gates finally swing open. A herald, his face a mask of practiced solemnity, stepped forward to face the waiting crowds. "The gods have called him home," he announced. "The divine Claudius has passed into legend." A moment of respectful silence was observed. Then, in the very next breath, "But Rome does not weep for long, for a new sun rises. Behold your emperor. Hail, Nero." And just like that, the transfer was complete. The sound of "Hail, Claudius" was forgotten, replaced by a thundering chorus of "Hail, Nero." The courtiers who had wept for the father now cheered for the son. Allegiance in Rome was not a matter of the heart. It was a matter of survival. The old sun had set. The new one was already burning bright. The body of the old emperor wasn't even cold, but his memory was already being erased. After the public spectacle of the imperial funeral, after the last fake tear had been shed, and after Nero was comfortably seated on his new throne, the private debts were paid. Locusta was not summoned to the palace. That would be too conspicuous. Instead, a quiet, unassuming senator visited her workshop late one night. He was a man who officially did not exist, representing an emperor who officially knew nothing. He did not carry another pouch of gold. The previous payment was for the service. This was a bonus, a retainer for future work. The senator presented her with 2 scrolls, sealed with the new emperor's personal crest. The first was a deed to a vast country estate, a quiet place for a skilled artisan to retire and continue her horticultural studies. The second scroll was far more valuable. It was a full pardon, signed by Nero himself, a pardon not for any specific crime, but for all crimes, past, present, and future. Locusta, the killer of an emperor, was now an official friend of the state. She was untouchable, an asset. Her poisons were no longer a criminal enterprise. They were now a tool of state security, under the direct protection of the new god on the throne. She looked at the pardon, her name written in elegant script next to the emperor's. The irony was as potent as any poison she had ever concocted. She had not just earned a fortune, she had earned a license. Murder was now, for her, perfectly legal. With imperial protection and a vast new estate, Locusta's career entered a new, unprecedented phase. She was no longer just a contractor. She was now a consultant, a teacher. At the personal request of Emperor Nero, she established what was, for all intents and purposes, Rome's first officially sanctioned academy of toxicology. There were no diplomas on the walls, no graduation ceremonies, but there were students, eager pupils hand-picked by Nero's security chief, sent to her country estate to learn from the master herself. They learned how to identify rare fungi. They practiced the art of extracting venom from snakes. They studied dosages, memorizing the lethal limits for men of different weights and constitutions. It was a rigorous, if morbid, curriculum. Locusta was a demanding instructor. "Precision is everything," she would tell them, her voice calm and authoritative. "A sloppy artist gets caught. A sloppy poisoner gets both themselves and their client killed. There is no room for error in our profession." Assassins sat in her garden like university students, taking notes as she pointed out the deadly beauty of a water hemlock plant. They were learning how to kill, with the full backing and resources of the Roman state. It was a new height of imperial decadence, a state-sponsored program for political murder. Her graduates would go on to serve the emperor as silent, effective instruments. Locusta was no longer just a poisoner. She was a faculty dean, shaping the next generation of state-sanctioned killers. Her dark art was now institutionalized. Power, once obtained, does not like to be shared. And Nero, the boy who had become a god, quickly grew tired of the long shadow his mother cast over his throne. Agrippina had created an emperor, but she had forgotten to teach him how to obey. She treated him not as a divine ruler, but as her personal project. She offered unsolicited advice in the Senate. She questioned his appointments. She reminded him, constantly and publicly, that his power was a gift from her. To the young, arrogant Nero, her guidance began to feel like a leash. Her love felt like a cage. The paranoia that defined the Roman court began to seep deep into his soul. He saw his mother's hand in every political slight, her voice in every dissenting whisper. The woman who had cleared his path to the throne now seemed to be the greatest obstacle standing in his way. The Creator had become the threat. And so the student decided it was time to surpass the master. In a moment of supreme, tragic irony, Nero decided that his own mother had become an inconvenience, a liability to the state. He needed a solution, a permanent one. He needed the certainty that only one person in the empire could provide. The artist he now kept on retainer. The cup that had moved one throne was about to be filled again. But this time, it would not be for an aging, gluttonous emperor. It would be for the emperor's own mother. The cycle was about to complete itself in the most monstrous way imaginable. The summons, this time, was not from a desperate queen cloaked in shadow. It was an official imperial decree, delivered by a centurion with cold, uninterested eyes. Locusta was being called to the palace, not as a criminal, but as a consultant. She was led into a private chamber where Emperor Nero was practicing his lyre. He did not stop playing when she entered. He let her wait, a deliberate display of power. He was no longer the fidgeting boy in the dining hall. He was the master now, and he wanted her to feel it. "Locusta," he began, finally setting the instrument aside, his tone bored. "I have another liability. A young one. My dear stepbrother, Britannicus. He has a strong claim to the throne, and his supporters grow bolder. He sings better than I do, they say. Can you imagine?" The reason was so petty, so narcissistic, it was almost comical. His continued existence, it complicates things, Nero continued, a pout on his face. It is a discordant note in the beautiful symphony of my reign. There was no bag of gold this time, no negotiation. This was a direct order from a god to his most useful instrument. "I require another of your solutions," Nero said. "Something fast, something public to send a message, but something that still looks like an act of the gods. A sudden seizure, perhaps?" Locusta simply bowed her head. She was no longer a contractor. She was an employee. The work was the same. Only the client had changed. The cup that had made a boy an emperor was now being used to secure his bloody reign. The kitchen was open for business once more. But the symphony of Nero's reign was destined for a disastrous finale. His tyranny, his decadence, and his spectacular incompetence had finally caught up with him. The Senate, once a gathering of frightened sheep, finally found its courage. The legions in the provinces declared their allegiance to a new leader, a stern old general named Galba. Nero, the self-proclaimed artist and god, was declared an enemy of the state. He fled Rome, his golden palace in flames behind him. His end was not glorious. It was a pathetic, whimpering suicide in a dark, dirty cellar. Galba marched into Rome not with promises of poetry and parties, but with promises of order, of discipline, of a return to old Roman values. He was a traditionalist, a soldier who had no patience for the decadent secrets and shadowy instruments of the previous regime. In this new Rome, there was no place for an official poisoner. Locusta's imperial pardon, once her greatest shield, was now nothing more than a worthless piece of parchment. In fact, it was worse. It was a signed confession of her partnership with the deposed tyrant. The guards who once protected her estate now came with iron chains. The centurion at her door was not delivering a summons from an emperor, but an arrest warrant from the state. The artist, the consultant, the dean of the Academy of Death, was dragged from her workshop. Her carefully organized vials were smashed. Her secret recipes were scattered to the wind. The system she had served so faithfully, the power she had helped create, now turned on her with brutal, impersonal efficiency. Her contract had been terminated. There was no quiet, elegant exit for Locusta. Her death was a public spectacle, a piece of political theater for the new regime. She was paraded through the streets of Rome, the same streets where her powerful clients once ruled as gods. The crowds that had once trembled at the whisper of her name now jeered and threw stones. They condemned her as a monster, the embodiment of Nero's evil. They conveniently forgot that her poisons had only ever been a tool, wielded by the very same elite they had once cheered for. As she was led to her execution, Locusta felt no fear, no regret, perhaps only a professional's frustration. They called her a monster, but she knew the truth. She was merely a service provider. She had fulfilled her contracts. She had delivered her products on time. The issue was never the quality of her work. It was the insatiable, treacherous appetites of her clients. Her end was prolonged and brutal, designed to satisfy the mob's thirst for vengeance. The state that had once paid for her skills now used her death as a public relations campaign. The cup had, indeed, moved thrones. It had removed a bumbling emperor and installed a tyrant. It had secured a bloody reign. But in the end, the poisoner herself was just another ingredient, used and then discarded. The ultimate truth of Rome was simple. The only thing more dangerous than drinking from the cup was being the one who holds it. Power is the deadliest poison of all, and its final invoice is always paid in full.